and ready to get going. Please change your status to purple. See, there's a few folks out there still green, but great. Looks like everyone that can hear me changed to purple. So let's go ahead and just get started. Sorry, a little bit late this morning, but let's get going. So we are talking about simple techniques to control permissions for InfoPath forms. Now this is the part 2 of last week's webinar. We did the same topic last week. Unfortunately, we didn't get through all of the demos, so I figured we should probably go and spend another webinar. I think it's worthwhile going through lots of great techniques that I'm going to show you later on. So we're doing this part 2. If you weren't here last week and you missed last week's webinar, don't worry. I have a link at the end of the presentation. We have that webinar recorded, it's uploaded on YouTube, and we're going to go and send out the deck after this webinar, so you can go and take a look at part 1 after this morning's webinar. So just to kind of quickly recap the agenda, same as last week. Just to quickly kind of recap what we talked about last week. So in terms of permissions, there's basically 2 types of permissions that you could use. SharePoint permissions are great, but the limitation with SharePoint permissions is that it's fairly difficult to use SharePoint permissions within InfoPath to say, if you're in a particular group within SharePoint, I want to show this particular view, or I want to show this piece of data in this control, and so forth. SharePoint permissions are great for actually modifying list items, controlling list items, controlling visibility within lists or libraries, and so forth. Active Directory is the other alternative, and Active Directory actually is really good to use in InfoPath. And then my bullet point actually further down kind of dives into that a little bit more. You can actually go and retrieve user information using Active Directory, and there's a couple of ways to do that. You can use the user profile web service, excuse me, to actually go pull in data from the current user. That can help you figure out what groups they're a part of, whether who their manager is, so you can assign tasks to their manager or notify their manager with email or something like that. Qdabra has an Active Directory web service, we call it ADWS for short, which kind of takes the user profile web service a little bit further. It gives you a little bit more functionality, such as finding users of a particular group, finding employees of a manager, finding out whether you're part of a particular group using a very simple function that just returns a true or false, and so forth. So if you're interested in that, there's more information about our ADWS service on our website. And finally, with workflows, we had talked about 2 types of workflows. SharePoint Designer workflows, which I'll be showing you a lot of SharePoint Designer today, with a lot of workflows that I kind of built within SharePoint, simple stuff within SharePoint Designer. And we'll also be looking at a lot of forms-based workflows today. Some advantages with SharePoint Designer, you can, it integrates very, very well with SharePoint. You can manage permissions, SharePoint permissions very well using SharePoint Designer. There's a bunch of out-of-box workflows that you can use as well. A little bit tricky getting form workflow variables within to your form to be used, but definitely possible. Whereas forms-based workflows, everything within the workflow resides within the form. So the form actually keeps track of your workflow status, assigned to all of those variables, so that it's actually quite easy to go and do rules or data validation within the form, because all your variables are within the actual solution as well. So let's just kind of have a quick recap of last week. Last week I had 2 demos that I showed you. One was showing the default print view to not authorized, and we had some admin views as well with that demo. And the second demo was creating a SharePoint Designer workflow to remove permissions on the form when you submit it, and that way you can actually control whether or not they can go and edit the form after they submit it. So I did kind of show the demo really quick last week. I'll show it again today, this morning. But basically, the last demo that I had here has 4 major points. We're going to use an admin view to actually show an approval section template part for XDP. Depending on what your role is, we're going to go and actually use the main view, but then have this conditional section appear based on whether or not you're an admin. We're going to go and switch views based on the status of the actual workflow. We're going to send out email notifications based on whether or not the workflow is approved or not. And finally, we're going to show how archiving works based on the status using an SPD workflow. Okay, so let's see. We're going to go dive right into the demos here. So let's go ahead and make sure I refresh this. Sorry, it's a little slow this morning. Let's go and make sure that. Okay, perfect. All right, so I have this library here. I call it Demo 3. So I'm just going to go ahead as so I'm Joe User here, and if you remember from last week, Joe User is my my user account. It's my non-admin account. So we're going to go ahead and actually create a request using Joe User here. So we're going to go call it my request. Fairly simple. And we're just going to go in and say, I'd like a new monitor for Joe. So so he's just going to go ahead. This is his request form. Very simple. It's not too fancy or anything like that. So let's go ahead and we'll go and submit the form. Great. So Joe sent his request, and it's right now submitted, and someone's going to go and take a look at that, his request for a new monitor. Notice it's actually not in this library when after I submit it. It's actually submitted to a separate library. It's here called Demo 3 Submitted. So here's the one that I just created this morning. So if I go ahead and open that up as Joe User, notice that the view that I'm looking at is not the same view that I had originally opened it up as. And the title is actually changed. It says your form is waiting for approval. So now if I go and I switch hats here, I'm going to go and be myself now. So here's me. I'm the approver. So let's go ahead and refresh this library. So I see Joe User here, and I'm going to go ahead and open that. And because I'm an admin, I have this special section over down here. This is the approval XDP, the template part, because it's assigned to me. So I know that it's a section that I can see only. So I'm going to say this is approved. And I'm going to go ahead and approve it. Great. So then what happens now here is, again, this library is not going to have a new entry. Instead, since I approved it, it's going to go into this approved library, this Demo 3 approved library. Here's the new entry that I submitted as. So if I go back as Joe User again, let's close this. And we'll go and open up Demo 3 approved. Here's the latest entry. So if I go ahead and open that, again, the view has changed and it says your form has been approved. So that's kind of the basic demo here. So I'm going to go behind the scenes and show you how that works exactly. So the very first part is there's multiple views within this form. So I'm going to show you all the different views. This is the basic edit view. This is the view that Joe User saw at the very beginning of the request process. Fairly simple form. I have an admin view. So if you see here, there's a lot more going on here. So I have, the basic form. But basically what I did was I added this XDP workflow, this approval workflow template part. So this has a bunch of form assignment. This has our approve reject button and so forth. It has a change history. I didn't expand the form assignment, but it has all of this, and it helps actually with figuring out all the details with the workflow itself. So there's conditional formatting here, or conditional rules to actually show you what exactly is going on behind the scenes. So let's go ahead and bring up my form load rules. So what I did here was I loaded my approvers here. I have a separate list, or in this demo I use an XML. That is going to go and load the approvers. I believe I here just hard-coded them for now, but you can look these up based on a list or a SQL database and so forth. And I have three separate rules to actually change the view, whether or not, or looking at what the status is. So if the form is submitted, it's going to go and look at the current status. It's going to change it to my submitted view. If the if the form is approved or if the request is approved, then I'm going to go and change it to the approved view and so forth. And then finally, what I did here was based on the assigned to, since I assigned it to myself, I'm going to use the username function, and if the assigned to is actually equal to the person who's actually opening the form, I'm going to change it to the admin view, so they get that special view so that they can go and approve the form or reject the form. So that's just kind of quickly how to use the views, or so how to use the status of the form in order to change the different view. And finally, the last two views are fairly simple. It's just the main view. It's in the display-only form. I have all these as calculated value controls instead of text boxes. And the title is just slightly different. Here I said the form has been approved. And then for the submitted view, I just said your form is awaiting for approval. The next interesting piece is the actual submit functionality. So let's go open up my data connections. So I have my workflow part, but the important parts that I want to show you are the two submit connections that I have. The first one I have is submitted. So basically what this is doing is it's a submit data connection to the Demo3 submitted library. So I attached that to this particular submit button. If I find the rule here. So the submit and close rule, all I'm doing is that when I click on the submit button, I'm actually using the submit connection, submit data connection called submitted, and what that does is actually go and sends this form to that Demo3 submitted library. This Demo3 submitted library here. So the main thing here is that what it's doing is that instead of actually submitting to the library that it's actually published to, I can actually control whether or not it's being submitted to a separate library. So for example, if I wanted to, in the admin view, I have an approve and a reject button. Now I didn't set up the reject button, but I could, and what I can do is I can actually set up the form to submit to different libraries based on whatever button I had submitted to. So for example, here I have the approve button. I am actually submitting it to a, I think it was this one. I'm actually submitting it to a separate library. Versus the reject button, what I can do is I can actually submit that to a rejected library instead. So that's an interesting technique for actually going managing where the files or where the requests are actually going to be living. If you wanted a separate library for all the rejected requests, and a separate library for all the approved requests and submitted requests and so forth. So in the SharePoint Designer here, a couple of workflows that I have going on behind the scenes. So I have this hooked up to Demo3 here, and if I go to, sorry, I'm going to go back to the Demo3 submitted. And I'm sorry, no. I went to the wrong one. I went to the approved. There we go. So in this section here, I have workflows, and I have one workflow. It's called send email. And what this is basically doing is, I'm going to go ahead and add the workflow. I use an impersonation step, but I don't believe you need to. What this is doing is when, sorry, just going to go back here for the start options. When the workflow is going to start automatically when the item is actually created. So if you remember how I set it up, when I approve a request, it's actually going to go and send the request to the Demo3 approved library. So this is going to go and kick off the workflow because I'm actually creating an item in that library. So if I go and open up my workflow again, all it's doing here, I have hard-coded this for now, but it's going to go and send an email to myself saying the request is approved. But you can go and basically specify a particular email address here if you wanted to go and send it to the original creator, or if you wanted to go and you're going to have the created by field within the actual request form itself. So if you promote that and make that a workflow variable, you can have access to that and actually go and use that variable within here so that you can actually know who to send it to. You can also specify additional workflow variables within your form. For example, the title of the form, the title of the request. You can put that information into the subject and even into the main text as well. And that'll actually go and send an email to the original creator of the form. Or you can even send the request to the requesters or to the approver as well. That's completely up to you. So I believe that's it for the demo. So we have a little bit of extra time. So I do have a kind of a bonus demo to show you today, unrelated to the topics that I've been talking about with permissions. So the bonus demo that I have here is a rating demo. This is quite easy to make. I made this into an XDP myself so I can reuse it among the rest of my forms. But I thought it was an interesting technique that I wanted to kind of share with you all because I thought that it's pretty easy to do, and you can definitely go in and do it yourself. Only takes maybe about 15 minutes to go and set it up, and you can, as I said, create an XDP so that way you can reuse it across all your forms. So this is your basic rating control. And all I did here was I made two different stars. I made a yellow star and a gray star. They're very simple to make. I just did it in PowerPoint. There's a star shape, and then I just made the colors, saved it as a picture, and then that's it. That was done. So here I have I have 10 picture buttons, and as you can see, I made excuse me, 5 of the picture buttons into the yellow star, 5 of the picture buttons into the gray star. All I have here is one field. I call it rating. It's an integer field, and all it's going to do is store numbers between 0 through 5. So I'll show you. I'll preview this really quick, and I'll show you what it does. So it starts off as 5 gray stars, but then I can click on any one of the stars, and basically it'll appear as a rating control will. I click on the second star, and it'll highlight the first 2 stars. And I also have a expression or a calculated value control here on the right just to show you what the number value is. You don't have to have that there. You can certainly delete that. But that's pretty much all it does here. But it's kind of a neat visual, way to represent a rating control as opposed to having a user type in a number or pick a number from a drop down, and they can immediately see, 5 stars. That's great. Maybe it's like a review type thing. So how this works, if I show you the rules here, it's pretty simple actually. It just takes a bit of time to actually set up all the rules on each of the button. But for all of the buttons, you want to have a set value rule, and depending on where it is here, the set value here, the very far left one's going to be 1, this one's going to be 2, this one's going to be 3, and so forth. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, I know live meeting is lagging a little bit, but if you can follow here, so the very far left one is 1, then the second one is 2, and so forth. And you want to do the same thing with the gray buttons as well. So the very far left gray button, you want to set this value to 1, 2, and so forth, all the way to 5. So that's the easy part. The part that's a little bit tricky is actually setting the hide control. So when I preview this, if you notice, there's only ever 5 controls being displayed at a time. So we want to make sure that that's the case, that the right number of each of the colored buttons are being displayed. So if you look at my hide control rule here, for the far left, for the one that I set the control to 1, the yellow star, I'm setting it so that if the rating is less than 1, I want to hide this control. So if you think about it, if the rating is 0, it can only be 0 through 5. If the rating is 0, then this control is going to be hidden. So that's going to be the case when you first open up the form. For this one, for the second yellow star, if rating is less than 2, then I'm going to hide this control. So if the rating is 1, well, it's only going to show the 1 gold star or the 1 yellow star, so this second star is not going to be displayed, and so forth. So rating less than 3, rating less than 4, rating less than 5. And for the gray button, or for the gray stars, similarly, we're going to do it the same way, except we're going to use a greater than. So for this one, if the rating is greater than 0, we're going to hide this control. So really, it's only going to be displayed at the very beginning of the form. And then this one's rating is greater than 1, rating is greater than 2, and so forth, all the way to the end. And that's pretty much it. This is just a calculated value control bound to the rating. Like I said, you don't need to have this. I just kind of included that as a visual on to say, what the value of the actual field is going to be. But that's pretty much it. That's my rating control. Looks pretty great. You can definitely publish this to the browser as well, although I'm previewing it in the client. But that's just kind of a simple technique on how to make your own rating control. All right. So as I promised, I do have a link to last week's webinar, part 1 on YouTube that we had published last week. I will make sure that Marcy gets this deck so that she can send it out, so that way you can have this link in case you want to recap and view last week's webinar as well. And finally, we have just kind of a quick announcement. We have some upcoming training. We have our master training class that we're offering as well here at Qdabra. So if you want any more information, feel free to email us at coursemanager@qdabra.com. I don't know if Marcy wants to jump in and add any more to that, but the next in-person class here is next month from the 8th to the 10th. But we also do have an online class. If you can't make it out here to Kirkland, Washington, and that online class is from the 21st of May to the 25th. And that's it for my demo. If you have any questions, please feel free to go and add a question to the Q&A tab on both the, anything to do with the workflow stuff, the permissions demo, or even the rating demo as well. And I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. So I'm going to stay around here for a while. So feel free to stick around if you are curious to answer some of the questions. Otherwise, thanks for coming, and hopefully we'll see you next time.